Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Tonight we're going deep into the dark woods and hidden valleys of Appalachia with 7 most disturbing true deep woods horror stories. These stories come from mail carriers, store workers, cable guys, and other regular people who saw something in the mountains that shouldn't exist. Each story is a real nightmare from the remote hills and old forests where scary legends turn out to be true, and the thick trees hide terrible secrets. These stories come from work reports, personal stories, and recorded calls that were never supposed to be shared. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Mr. Midnight for daily true horror stories that will keep you awake at night. Hit that bell so you never miss when the mountain fog brings whispers of fear. Now, let's go into the heart of Appalachia's most scary mysteries, where normal life ends and your worst nightmares come alive in the darkness between the trees. My name is Frank Kowalski, and I've been a mail carrier in eastern Kentucky for 15 years. I know every winding road, every rusted mailbox, and every family scattered through these mountain hollows. Most people think delivering mail is just dropping letters in boxes, but out here it's different. We're the lifeline. We bring medicine to folks who can't drive to town. We deliver Social Security checks to people who depend on them to eat. We're sometimes the only person these mountain families see all week. I take pride in my route. Rain or snow, I make sure everyone gets their mail. The post office gave me a medal last year for perfect attendance. 15 years, never missed a delivery. But what happened 3 weeks ago in the deep mountains changed everything I thought I knew about my job. Some routes, you see, never really end. The trouble started when the budget cuts came down from headquarters. Regional Supervisor Mr. Hayes called me into his office on a Tuesday morning. His desk was covered in maps and spreadsheets, red lines marking routes that were getting eliminated. "Frank, we're restructuring the rural routes," he said, not looking up from his papers. "Costs too much to deliver to all these mountain addresses. From now on, you stick to the main roads. No more driving up to those isolated cabins." I stared at the map. Red X's marked over places I'd been delivering to for years. Old mining settlements, family homesteads, retirement cabins tucked back in the hollows. "What about the Hendersons? Mrs. Peterson? They need their medicine deliveries." Hayes shrugged. "Inactive addresses. They can come to town if they need their mail." But I knew these people. Mrs. Peterson was 86 and hadn't driven in years. The Henderson family had 3 kids and no car. Mr. Williams lived 5 miles up a dirt road and depended on his disability checks. They weren't inactive. They were forgotten. My new route covered twice as much ground but skipped all the hard-to-reach places. I finished my official deliveries by noon every day. That's when I started using my personal truck. On my own time, I'd drive the old routes, making sure the mountain folks got their mail. It felt right. That's what mail carriers do. We serve everyone. The first weird thing happened on a Thursday. I was driving my beat-up Ford pickup deep into Miller's Hollow, following a road I'd traveled 1,000 times. My GPS started acting strange, showing roads that didn't exist and claiming I was in places I'd never heard of. The screen kept flickering, showing different maps. One minute it said I was on Route 15, the next it claimed I was on something called Old Postal Road 7. I turned the GPS off and kept driving. I knew these mountains by heart anyway. That's when I saw the mailbox for the old Riverside settlement. That address had been discontinued in 1987, according to our records. But there it was, a rusty blue mailbox sitting beside a gravel road I'd never noticed before. The numbers on the side read, Riverside P.O., Route 7. I stopped the truck. This wasn't right. Riverside had been abandoned when the coal mine closed, but the mailbox looked like it was still in use. Someone had cleared the weeds around it recently. I could see tire tracks in the gravel. I followed the road for about a mile. It wound through thick woods, then opened into a clearing where I saw something impossible. The Riverside post office was still there, not ruins or foundations. An actual building with paint that wasn't even faded. A postal truck was parked outside. A real USPS truck, same model as mine. I sat in my Ford for a minute trying to make sense of it. Then I saw him walking out of the post office carrying a mailbag over his shoulder. Joe Mitchell. I'd know that walk anyway. Joe had trained me when I first started the job. He'd been my mentor for 5 years before he died in that car accident on White Oak Mountain in 2018. I went to his funeral, but there he was, sorting through letters like any other Tuesday afternoon. I got out of my truck slowly. "Joe?" He looked up and grinned, that same crooked smile I remembered. "Frank! Good to see you, buddy. About time you found your way out here. Joe, how are you here?" He laughed, the same laugh I'd heard 100 times in the break room. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, as Mark Twain would say. "Come on, let me show you the operation." Everything about Joe looked normal. Same postal uniform, same wire-rimmed glasses, same coffee stains on his shirt. But when I got closer, I noticed his skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes didn't quite focus right, like he was looking through me instead of at me. "Got a hell of a route load today," Joe said, hefting his mailbag. "Seems like every day there's more mail to deliver. People just keep waiting." Inside the post office, I met 3 other carriers. Tom Brady, not the football player, the mailman who'd died in a snowstorm in 2003. Sarah Chen, who'd had a heart attack on her route in 2015. Mike Russo, killed when his truck went off Devil's Backbone Road in 2009. I recognized them all from the memorial photos hanging in our main office. They were all there, sorting mail, loading their bags, complaining about the workload just like living postal workers. But their skin had that same gray tint as Joe's. Their movements were too slow, too careful, and when they talked, their voices sounded like they were coming from far away. "We can't rest until everyone gets their mail," Sarah explained, not looking up from the letters she was sorting. "There's so much that never got delivered. People waiting for their checks, their medicine, their letters from family. We failed them when we died, so now we have to make it right." Tom showed me huge canvas bags filled with mail dating back decades. Social Security checks from the 1960s. Birthday cards that never reached their destinations. Love letters that never made it home from Vietnam. Thousands and thousands of pieces, all waiting to be delivered. "The living carriers, they gave up on the hard routes," Mike said. "Budget cuts," they said. "Too dangerous, too expensive. But we know better. A postal worker's job isn't done until everyone gets their mail." Joe clapped me on the shoulder, and his hand felt cold even through my jacket. "That's why you're here, Frank. You didn't give up either. You kept delivering to the mountain folks when headquarters told you to stop. That's the kind of dedication we need. But I'm not dead. Not yet," Joe said quietly. "But you're close, closer than you think." That's when I started feeling dizzy. The post office began spinning around me. Through the window I could see my Ford pickup, but it looked different, older, covered in snow that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. "Joe, I need to go home. My wife Sarah's expecting me for dinner." "Can't leave now, Frank. Too much work to do. People have been waiting so long for their mail." I tried to walk to my truck, but my legs felt heavy, like I was walking through deep water. My uniform felt strange, loose on my body. When I looked down, the blue fabric was fading to gray. What's happening to me? Joe put his arm around my shoulders. "You took the oath of service, Frank. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. Sometimes that appointment takes longer than expected." I caught my reflection in the post office window. My face was pale, my eyes unfocused, just like theirs. I looked like I was disappearing, becoming transparent around the edges. "I died, didn't I?" 3 days ago, Joe said gently. "Car went off the road during that bad storm. Truck rolled down into Lear's Ravine. They found your body this morning, but you weren't in the truck. You walked 3 miles through the snow with your mail bag trying to finish your deliveries. That's dedication, Frank. That's why you belong here with us." I remembered now. The snowstorm had come out of nowhere. The mountain road was icy. I'd been trying to deliver Mrs. Peterson's heart medication when my truck hit that patch of black ice. The last thing I remembered was the truck rolling, mail scattering everywhere, and thinking about all the people who were waiting for their deliveries. Sarah, my wife. "She's been looking for me?" "The search teams found you this morning," Tom said. still in uniform, still carrying your mail bag. They said it was the most dedicated thing they'd ever seen, a postal worker who kept trying to deliver mail even after he died. Outside, I could see other postal trucks arriving, more carriers like us, all gray-skinned and slow-moving, all carrying bags full of undelivered mail. Some I recognized from old memorial photos. Others were from decades before my time, all of us bound by the same duty. How long do we have to do this? Until everyone gets their mail, Sarah said. Could be years, could be forever. Depends on how much guilt we carry. I looked at the mountains of undelivered mail. Letters from soldiers who never came home. Birthday cards for children who grew up without them. Medicine that might have saved lives if it had arrived on time. All of it, our responsibility now. Joe handed me a new mail bag, heavy with letters addressed to people who'd been waiting decades for delivery. Your route starts at dawn, Frank. We'll cover the really isolated places, the ones the living carriers won't go. That's our specialty now. I took the bag. It felt right in my hands. This was what I'd always done. Made sure everyone got their mail, no matter how hard it was to reach them. My funeral was on a Saturday. Through supernatural eyes, I watched my wife Sarah receive a condolence card with no return address. She recognized my handwriting. Immediately. The postmark said, Riverside P.O., a post office that wasn't supposed to exist. Every day at 3 p.m., Sarah finds a letter from me in her mailbox. I tell her about my new route, about the people I'm finally able to help, about the mail that's been waiting so long to be delivered. She understands. She always knew how seriously I took my job. Sometimes she drives out to the abandoned Riverside settlement and leaves fresh coffee and sandwiches at the old post office. Other families started doing the same, wives and children of postal workers who never came home. They know we're still out there, still working. The new mail carriers avoid the deep mountain roads now, especially during bad weather. But hikers sometimes report seeing postal trucks on abandoned roads at twilight. Letters addressed to dead people still disappear from the main post office sorting room. My supervisor quietly retired my route number out of respect. But the route isn't really retired. It's just been transferred to the night shift where time moves differently and the mail never stops coming. I'm still Frank Kowalski, and I'm still a mail carrier in eastern Kentucky. I've just got a different kind of route now, one that doesn't end until every last person gets what they've been waiting for. In the Postal Service, we have a saying, the mail must go through. Even after death, some of us take that more seriously than others. My name is Tammy Sue Collins, and I've been working retail for 8 years. Started bagging groceries when I was 18, worked my way up to cashier, then assistant manager. I've dealt with drunk customers, shoplifters, and people trying to return moldy food they bought 3 weeks ago. I thought I'd seen everything the job could throw at me. But what happened during my 6 months working nights at Miller's Quick Stop in Millfield, Kentucky changed everything I thought I knew about customer service. Some customers, it turns out, don't stop shopping just because they're dead. I took the night shift job out of pure necessity. My day job at the bank wasn't paying enough, and with rent going up every year, I needed that extra money. Miller's Quick Stop was the only convenience store in Millfield, a tiny mountain town with maybe 800 people. The store sat right on Route 421, serving all the isolated families living up in the hollows and ridges that stretched back into the mountains for miles. The owner, Mr. Miller, was getting too old to work nights himself. He needed someone reliable, someone who knew how to handle the mountain folk who came down from the deep hollows for supplies. These weren't your typical convenience store customers. Most lived so far back in the mountains that coming to town was a big deal. They'd drive down winding dirt roads that took an hour just to reach the main highway. Mr. Miller walked me through the basics on my first night. The store was small but packed with everything mountain families needed. Canned goods, flour, sugar, salt, basic medicines, kerosene for lanterns, and all the usual snacks and drinks. The cash register was ancient, one of those old manual ones that barely worked. We had a credit card reader, but half the customers paid in cash anyway. "Now, Tammy Sue," Mr. Miller said, counting out the till. "Most of your regular. Our customers are good people. They might look rough around the edges, but they're honest. Some of them have been shopping here since I opened 30 years ago. You extend credit when they need it. Keep track in this ledger here. They always pay up eventually. He showed me a thick notebook filled with handwritten accounts. Names, dates, amounts owed. Some entries went back months. The mountain folk, they take care of their own. You treat them right, they'll treat you right. What he didn't tell me was that some of my most regular customers had been dead for decades. The first few weeks were normal enough. I learned the routine quickly. Days were busy with regular town customers and people passing through on the highway. But nights were different. After about 10 o'clock, it was just me and the mountain families who preferred to shop when the store was quiet. They were exactly like Mr. Miller described, polite, soft-spoken, with thick mountain accents that took some getting used to. Most wore simple clothes, work boots, flannel shirts. The men always removed their hats when they came inside. The women called me honey or darling in that gentle way mountain ladies do. But there were some customers who stood out, even among the mountain folk. They always came between midnight and 4 in the morning, always paid in cash, old bills and coins that looked like they came from a different era, and they only bought certain things: flour, salt, sugar, basic medicines, kerosene, matches. Never anything modern like energy drinks or frozen dinners or lottery tickets. The first one I really noticed was Luke Maynard, probably in his 70s, thin as a rail, with deep-set eyes and hands that looked like they'd seen decades of hard work. He came in every Tuesday night around 2 a.m., driving an old Ford pickup that looked like it hadn't been made since the 70s. Luke always bought the same things: 5-pound bag of flour, salt, sugar, a bottle of aspirin, and a gallon of kerosene. He'd count out exact change from a worn leather pouch, mostly quarters and dimes. Some so old, I could barely make out the dates. "How's your family doing, Mr. Maynard?" I asked one night, making conversation while I bagged his groceries. "Oh, we're getting by up the holler," he said in that mountain way of speaking, all the words running together. "My grandson Billy, he's working the 3rd shift at the sawmill, brings home enough to keep us fed." I nodded and smiled, but something about that bothered me. I'd lived in Millfield my whole life, and I knew the sawmill had been closed for years, shut down after some kind of accident back in the late 70s before I was born. But I figured maybe Luke was confused, or maybe there was another sawmill I didn't know about deeper in the mountains. Old folks sometimes get their facts mixed up. It was Luke who paid me with the mercury dimes that really got my attention. 3 weeks into the job, he came in for his usual supplies, but when he opened his pouch, it was mostly dimes. Old silver dimes with dates from the 1940s. "Mr. Maynard," I said, "these dimes are really old. They might be worth more than face value." He looked at me with those deep eyes and shook his head. "Money's money, darling. A dime's a dime." I took them, but something felt strange. The coins were cold, much colder than they should have been sitting in someone's pocket, and they had this weird smell like wet earth or old leaves. After Luke left, I couldn't stop thinking about those dimes and about what he'd said about his grandson working at the sawmill. So I did what any curious person would do in a small town. I looked it up. The Millfield Public Library stayed open late on Thursdays, and they had all the old newspapers on microfilm. I found what I was looking for in the September 15, 1978 edition of the Millfield Herald. "Sawmill accident kills 2, read the headline. The article described how a boiler explosion at Hare, 12 Sawmill, had killed Luke Maynard, age 73, and his grandson Billy Maynard, age 19. Both had been working the night shift. Luke's body was found near the main saw, Billy's near the boiler room. I stared at that screen for a long time, reading the article over and over. Luke Maynard, 73 years old, died September 13, 1978, almost 50 years ago. But I had just sold groceries to Luke Maynard 3 nights earlier. I started paying closer attention to my strange late-night customers after that. There was Mary Ellen Combs, who bought flour and sugar every Friday night. She always mentioned her husband Junior, who was working the coal mine over in Harlan County. I looked her up too. Mary Ellen and Junior Combs had died in the 1977 flood when their trailer was swept away. She was 62, he was 65. Then there was the Davidson family, Tom, his wife Sarah, and their teenage son Mark. They came in together every Sunday night buying supplies for the week. Tom always mentioned how Mark was doing good in school, might even get to go to college. I found their obituaries from 1981, house fire. All three had died of smoke inhalation. Every single one of my midnight customers, the ones who paid in old money and bought only basic supplies, were dead, had been dead for decades. But here they were, shopping in my store like they were still living their old routines. The security cameras should have picked up something, right? Mr. Miller had installed them a few years back after a couple of break-ins. But when I checked the recordings the next morning, they showed me standing behind the counter, apparently talking to empty air and bagging groceries for no one. On the recordings, I looked crazy, taking money from invisible hands, putting groceries in bags that floated away on their own. The register drawer opening and closing by itself. I started keeping my own records. A little notebook where I wrote down every ghost customer, what they bought, when they came in, what they said. The patterns were clear. They were all buying the same things they would have bought when they were alive. All shopping at the same times they used to. All still talking about their lives like they were ongoing. Luke still talked about Billy working at the sawmill. Mary Ellen still worried about Junior's cough from the coal dust. The Davidsons still planned for Mark's future. They were stuck in their old lives, playing them out over and over again. The living customers never saw them. I tested this by watching carefully when regular customers came in during the day. If Mrs. Henderson from town was shopping at the same time as Mary Ellen Combs, they walked right past each other like the other person didn't exist. But I could see them all. After a month of this, I decided to test something. When Luke came in for his Tuesday night shopping, I worked up the courage to say something. "Mr. Maynard," I said as he counted out his dimes, "I looked up that sawmill accident from 1978, the one where you and Billy died." He went very still, his old hands frozen over the coins. "Now why would you go and do a thing like that?" he asked, not looking up at me. "Because I was curious. Because you and Billy died almost 50 years ago, but you're standing here buying groceries." Luke finally looked up and his eyes were sadder than anything I'd ever seen. "Death ain't what people think it is, darling," he said quietly. "For mountain folk like us, dying is just another kind of living. We got routines, responsibilities. Can't just stop taking care of our families because our hearts quit beating. But your families are gone too, Mr. Maynard. I looked them up. Most of them died years ago." He smiled at that, the first time I'd seen him smile. "You think death separates mountain families?" "Child, you got a lot to learn about how things work up in the hollows. We take care of our own, alive or dead." That's when I understood. These weren't lost souls or vengeful spirits. They were just mountain families doing what mountain families do, taking care of each other, keeping their routines, maintaining their connections. And somehow, I had become part of that routine. Word spread through the hollow community, both living and dead, that the Collins girl at Miller's store was understanding. More ghost families started shopping during my shifts. The register ran out of space for all the old coins and bills. I had to get a separate box just for the antique money. Some brought me gifts, hand-carved wooden spoons, quilted pot holders, jars of preserves that tasted better than anything I'd ever had. They shared stories about the old ways of mountain life, skills and traditions that were disappearing from the living world. I started writing it all down. Not just what they bought, but what they told me. Stories about how to preserve food without refrigeration, how to make medicine from wild plants, how families survived in the mountains before modern conveniences. The living customers started noticing changes too, though they couldn't see the ghosts directly. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that her grandfather had visited her in a dream, telling her where to find the deed to some old family land. Mr. Johnson said he'd gotten the strangest feeling that his dead father wanted him to check on old Mrs. Wilson up the ridge, and sure enough, she'd fallen and needed help. The boundary between the living and dead was getting thinner around my store. That's when the problem started. Mr. Miller came in one morning to check the books and found thousands of dollars worth of inventory missing with no record of payment. The security cameras showed me giving away merchandise to empty air. To him, it looked like I was stealing everything I could carry. "Tammy Sue, "I've known your family for years," he said, more disappointed than angry. "But I can't keep losing money like this. I'm going to have to let you go." I tried to explain about the ghost customers, about the old money they paid with, about how they were just buying what they needed. But how do you explain something like that? How do you prove that ghosts pay their bills? Mr. Miller thought I was having some kind of breakdown. He fired me that day. But the ghost families didn't abandon me. Luke Maynard came to see me at home 3 nights later. "We heard what happened," he said, standing on my porch like he was still flesh and blood. "That ain't right. You've been good to us, treating us with respect. Time for us to return the favor." The next week, a lawyer in town called me. He said he had an unusual client who wanted to sell a small building on Main Street for much less than market value, but only to me specifically. The client insisted on paying all the legal fees and wanted to remain anonymous. I knew it was the ghosts helping me, though I never found out exactly how they managed it. I opened Tammy Sue's country store 6 months later. It looked like an old-fashioned general store from the outside, but I stocked both modern conveniences for living customers and old-style goods for my ghost families. The living customers loved it. They said it reminded them of how stores used to be, with personal service and a family atmosphere. The ghost customers were happy too. They finally had a place where someone understood their needs. I kept separate books for both communities. The living customers paid with credit cards and modern cash. The ghost customers paid with their old coins and bills, which I discovered were worth far more to collectors than their face value. Some of those Mercury dimes Luke had been paying with were worth $50 each. Both communities helped each other through me. Ghost grandparents sent messages to living grandchildren. Living family members left flowers and mementos that somehow made their way to the spirits who needed them. But running a store for both the living and the dead took its toll on me. I was losing weight, losing energy. Some mornings I could barely get out of bed. Dr. Martinez said my blood work looked like I had some kind of chronic fatigue, but none of the usual treatments helped. It was Mary Ellen Combs who figured it out. "Honey," she said one night, "you're giving too much of yourself to help us. We're taking life energy from you just by being here. We never meant to hurt you." That's when I understood why I was getting weaker. Constant contact with spirits was draining my life force. I was slowly dying to help them keep existing. The ghost families started visiting less often after that. They spread out their shopping trips, came in smaller groups, tried to minimize their impact on me. But we all knew it wasn't a long-term solution. Luke Maynard came to see me one last time about a year later. "We found someone to take over for you," he said. "A young woman from up near Hazard. She's got the sensitivity, and she's stronger than you were when you started. We can teach her like we taught you." Her name was Jennifer Walsh, and she had the same kind of natural ability to see and interact with spirits that I'd somehow developed. I spent 3 months training her, teaching her about each ghost family, their routines, their needs, their histories. Most of the spirits moved on during that time. They'd accomplished what they needed to, maintaining their family connections, passing down their stories, making peace with their deaths. Luke Maynard was one of the last to go. "Thank you, darling," he said, standing in my store one final time. "You gave us dignity when others would have called us crazy. You listened to our stories. You helped us take care of our families." He faded away like morning mist, and I never saw him again. My store is just a regular country store now. I still keep detailed records of everything that happened, though. Researchers from university. I sometimes come to interview me about supernatural encounters in Appalachian communities. My documentation has become part of academic studies about folklore and paranormal activity in isolated mountain regions. I moved to Lexington 2 years ago, but I drive back to Millfield every year on the anniversary of the sawmill accident. I visit the cemetery where Luke and Billy Maynard are buried, leave some flowers, tell them how their families are doing. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I think I can still hear Luke's voice saying, "Thank you, darling." And I know that somewhere, in whatever comes after life, the mountain families are still taking care of each other, just like they always have. Death, as Luke taught me, is just another kind of living. And for mountain folk, family connections run deeper than the grave. My name is Randy Hutchins, and I've been installing cable and internet service for 15 years across rural Tennessee. I work for Mountain View Communications, handling the customers that other techs won't touch, the ones living way up in the mountains where GPS doesn't work and cell towers can't reach. I drive a beat-up service van loaded with every type of cable box and router you can imagine, because you never know what ancient TV setup you'll find in these remote cabins. Most of my coworkers stick to the easy jobs in town. They complain when they have to drive more than 20 minutes from the office. But me? I actually like the challenge. There's something satisfying about bringing modern technology to people who've been cut off from the world. Plus, the company pays extra for the hard-to-reach addresses, and I need every dollar I can get. I've installed satellite dishes on rooftops during thunderstorms, run cable lines through crawl spaces full of snakes, and set up internet for families who hadn't watched TV in years. I thought I'd seen every possible situation a cable guy could face. But what happened last October on Pine Hollow Road changed everything I thought I knew about my job. It was a Tuesday morning when I got the service call. My supervisor, Dale, handed me a work order that looked different from our usual computer-printed tickets. This one was handwritten on old company letterhead I hadn't seen in years. The address read, Pine Hollow Settlement, 30 miles up Pine Hollow Road from Highway 127. The service requested was simple. Basic cable television installation. Where'd this one come from? I asked Dale, studying the faded ink. Found it in the old filing cabinet, he said, not looking up from his computer. Probably been sitting there for months. Customer called last week asking when we were coming out. The handwriting was neat but old-fashioned. Ned, like something from the 1990s. Even the language seemed outdated. Who called it basic cable anymore? But a job was a job, and the location was definitely in my territory. I loaded up my van with standard digital cable boxes, a few older analog receivers just in case, and headed out around noon. Highway 127 wound through thick Tennessee forest, past trailer parks and hunting lodges scattered between the trees. After about an hour, I found Pine Hollow Road, barely more than a dirt track disappearing into the mountains. The road was rough, full of potholes and washouts from recent rain. My van bounced and rattled as I climbed higher, trees pressing in on both sides. The deeper I went, the darker it got, even though it was the middle of the day. After 2 hours of slow driving, I finally saw buildings ahead. Pine Hollow was like stepping back in time. About 50 houses lined a single main street, all built in that 1980s style with vinyl siding and small front porches. But something felt off immediately. Every house looked brand new, like they'd just been built yesterday. The paint was perfect, the lawns were perfectly trimmed, and there wasn't a single sign of age or wear anywhere. The strangest part was the cars. Every single vehicle I saw was from the 1980s, but they all looked like they'd just rolled off the dealer lot. A red Ford Escort, a blue Chevrolet Cavalier, a brown Buick Regal, all spotless and shiny like show cars. I parked in front of what looked like a small general store and checked my phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual this deep in the mountains. I grabbed my tool bag and clipboard and walked toward the store to ask about the service call. A bell jingled as I opened the door. The inside was like walking into an old movie. Everything was perfectly organized. Shelves full of products I remembered from my childhood, prices that seemed way too low, and a cash register that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Can I help you?" asked the woman behind the counter. She was maybe 40 years old, wearing a bright sweater with shoulder pads and hair that looked like it came straight from the 1990s. "I'm Randy from Mountain View Communications," I said, showing her my ID badge. "I'm here about the cable installation request." Her face lit up like Christmas morning. "Oh, wonderful. We've been so excited about getting cable TV. Let me call Mayor Thompson right away." She picked up an old rotary phone and dialed. While she talked, I looked around the store some more. All the magazines were from 1994. The newspapers stacked by the counter were dated October 15th, 1994, with headlines about some Clinton administration news I barely remembered. "He'll be right over," the woman said, hanging up. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, by the way. We're all so grateful you made the trip up here. It's been so long since we've had any visitors." Before I could ask what she meant, a man in his 50s walked through the door. He was wearing a polo shirt and khakis that looked brand new but somehow dated, like costume shop dad clothes from an old sitcom. "You must be the cable man," he said, shaking my hand enthusiastically. "I'm Bill Thompson, the mayor. Welcome to Pine Hollow. We can't wait to see what's on TV these days. I heard they might be making new episodes of Cheers soon." I stared at him. Cheers had ended years ago, but he talked about it like it was still on the air. "Actually, sir, there are lots of new shows now. We've got hundreds of channels available." "Hundreds?" Mayor Thompson laughed. "Now you're pulling my leg." "Sarah, did you hear that? This young man says there are hundreds of TV channels." They both looked at me like I'd told them we had flying cars. I decided to just focus on the job. "Where would you like me to start the installation?" Mayor Thompson led me to the community center, a simple building in the middle of town. We thought we'd start here, get the main connection established, then run lines to individual houses later. I began setting up my equipment, but immediately ran into problems. My digital signal meter wasn't picking up anything, not even interference. It was like the electromagnetic spectrum was completely empty. My GPS unit had stopped working entirely, showing nothing but a blank screen. "Is there a cell tower nearby?" I asked Mayor Thompson. "A what tower?" he replied, genuinely confused. "For cell phones," I said, pulling mine out. He stared at my smartphone like it was alien technology. "What is that thing?" This was getting weird. Even the most isolated mountain communities had heard of cell phones by now. I tried explaining, but he just shook his head in amazement. "Looks like something from Star Trek," he said. "What will they think of next?" I decided to try the older analog equipment I'd brought as backup. Surprisingly, it worked perfectly. The signal came through clear and strong, picking up channels I didn't even know still existed. Local news stations, old network programming, even some channels that had gone off the air years ago. "This is incredible!" Mayor Thompson called to his neighbors who had gathered to watch. "Look at all these channels. We're getting Channel 7, Channel 12, even that new Fox network." The Fox network? That hadn't been new since the late 1980s. But everyone in Pine Hollow was acting like it was cutting-edge technology. As I worked, more residents came to watch. They all had that same outdated look. Clothes that seemed new but from decades ago, hairstyles that screamed 1990s, and a complete amazement at technology that should have seemed ancient to them. "Can we really get CNN?" asked an elderly woman. "I want to see what President Clinton is up to." "President Clinton?" I stopped working and really looked at these people. "Ma'am, Clinton hasn't been president for a long time." She looked confused. "Yes. What do you mean? He just got elected in 92. My hands started shaking as I connected the cables. Something was very wrong here. I checked my watch. It clearly showed October 2024, but everyone in Pine Hollow seemed to think it was still 1994. "What's today's date?" I asked Mayor Thompson. "October 15th, 1994, of course," he said. "Why do you ask?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the date. He squinted at the screen but didn't seem to understand what he was looking at. "That's a mighty fancy calculator," he said. "But I think it's broken." My truck radio had been picking up stations during the drive, but when I went back to check it, everything had changed. Instead of the country and rock stations I'd been listening to, it was only playing music from the early 1990s. The news reports were talking about events from 30 years ago like they were happening today. I walked around town trying to understand what was going on. Every calendar I saw showed October 1994. Every newspaper was dated October 15th, 1994. The residents talked about current events from that time period, made references to TV shows that had been canceled decades ago, and seemed genuinely confused by anything from after 1994. That's when I noticed something even stranger. The same conversations kept happening over and over. I watched Mayor Thompson introduce himself to me 3 times, using the exact same words each time. Sarah Mitchell answered the phone with identical enthusiasm every time it rang. The children playing in the street repeated the same games in the same order. When evening came, I tried to leave. But my van wouldn't start. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch. even though it had been running fine all day. Worse, the road I'd driven in on seemed different now. It curved in directions I didn't remember, and no matter which way I drove, I kept ending up back in the center of town. I spent the night in Pine Hollow's small motel. The owner, a cheerful woman named Betty, charged me $12 for the room and seemed thrilled to have a guest. "We don't get many, visitors," she said, handing me an actual metal key. "Not since the road got so bad." "What happened to the road?" I asked. "Oh, that landslide back in '94, she said casually. "Blocked the main route to town, but I'm sure they'll get it cleared soon." I woke up the next morning to find everyone acting like it was October 15th, 1994, all over again. The same conversations, the same activities, even the same weather. Mayor Thompson introduced himself to me again with the same enthusiastic handshake. That's when I realized the horrible truth. I went to the town library and found old newspaper archives from after 1994. The headlines were devastating. "Mountain community lost in massive landslide. Search called off for Pine Hollow residents. 50 people presumed dead in mining disaster." According to the reports, Pine Hollow had been completely cut off on October 15, 1994, when illegal strip mining operations had destabilized the mountain above the town. A massive landslide had buried the access roads and triggered a rockfall that killed everyone in the settlement. The mining company had covered up their involvement, and Pine Hollow had been forgotten by the outside world. But somehow the entire community was still here, still living that final day over and over again. They had no memory of dying, no awareness that 30 years had passed. They were trapped in a supernatural loop, repeating their last day for eternity. My presence was disrupting the pattern. Some residents began remembering things from after October 15, 1994. Fragments of memories that couldn't exist in their world. Children mentioned Halloween plans that would never happen. Adults talked about winter preparations for a season they'd never see. When I showed them photos and videos on my phone, when it worked, proving that decades had passed, the reaction was devastating. Some people broke down crying, finally understanding they were dead. Others refused to believe it, insisting I was lying or crazy. "We can't be dead," Sarah Mitchell sobbed. "I have dinner in the oven. My kids are coming home from school." But her kids would never come home. None of them would ever leave October 15, 1994. I realized I was trapped too. Every time I tried to drive out of town, the roads led me back. My equipment only worked sometimes, connecting me briefly to the outside world before cutting out again. I was becoming part of their loop, destined to repeat the same service call forever. The breakthrough came when I started documenting everything. When my phone worked, I recorded videos of the town, interviewed residents, and gathered evidence about the mining disaster. The truth wanted to come out. These people deserved justice for what had happened to them. Working with the residents who could handle the truth, we researched the cover-up. The mining company, Appalachian Resource Group, had falsified safety reports and bribed local officials to ignore their dangerous practices. When the disaster happened, they'd used their connections to suppress the investigation and hide their role in the deaths. As we uncovered more truth, something changed in Pine Hollow. The time loop began to weaken. My equipment started working more consistently. Some residents began remembering their full lives, not just their final day. "We need people to know what happened," Mayor Thompson said during one of his lucid moments. "We need justice." On what felt like my 100th October 15th in Pine Hollow, my phone finally connected to the internet with full signal. I uploaded everything: videos of the town, interviews with the dead residents, evidence of the cover-up, proof that 50 people had died because of corporate greed and negligence. The story went viral immediately. News crews tried to reach Pine Hollow but found only empty forest and old rock slides. Investigators reopened the 1994 case, leading to criminal charges against surviving executives from Appalachian Resource Group. Families of the victims, who had been told their loved ones had simply moved away, finally learned the truth and received settlements. As justice was served in the outside world, Pine Hollow began to fade. The supernatural energy holding the time loop together was finally at peace. The residents gathered in the town square for one last meeting. "Thank you," Mayor Thompson said, looking more real and solid than he had in weeks. "We can rest now." One by one, the people of Pine Hollow said their goodbyes and walked into a bright light that appeared at the end of Main Street. Sarah Mitchell was the last to go. "Tell people to remember us," she said. "We were real. We mattered." Then she was gone, and I was alone in an empty forest clearing where Pine Hollow had been. My van started immediately. The road back to civilization was clear and straight, leading me directly to Highway 127. When I reached cell service, my phone showed I'd been missing for 3 days. I quit Mountain View Communications the next week. I couldn't go back to normal cable installation after what I'd experienced. Instead, I became an advocate for forgotten mountain communities, working to prevent industrial disasters and ensure that isolated families aren't abandoned when corporations put profits over safety. Sometimes I drive past the area where Pine Hollow used to be. There's a memorial there now, funded by the legal settlements. It lists all 50 residents who died on October 15, 1994, and explains what really happened to them. I still work with cables and technology, but now I help community organizations and advocacy groups document environmental crimes and corporate cover-ups. Because I learned something important in Pine Hollow, the dead can't rest until the truth comes out. And sometimes, late at night when I'm working on a difficult installation, I swear I can hear Sarah Mitchell's voice on the radio, reminding me that everyone matters, everyone deserves justice, and some stories are too important to stay buried, even if it takes 30 years and a cable guy to dig them up. My name is Jerry Simpson, and I've been a high-voltage powerline technician for 12 years. I started right out of high school, working my way up from ground crew to senior climber. I've fixed lines during ice storms that would make your teeth chatter, worked through summer heat that could cook an egg on the metal towers, and climbed structures so tall you can see 3 states from the top. I'm not afraid of heights, electrical work, or working alone in the mountains. But what happened last October in the Blackwater Canyon area of West Virginia changed everything I thought I knew about my job. I found out that some things living in those mountains are a lot more dangerous than 69,000 volts of electricity. I work for Mountain State Electric, maintaining transmission lines that carry power across the remote ridges of West Virginia. Our service area covers about 400 square miles of some of the most rugged terrain in Appalachia. The work isn't glamorous. Most days I'm climbing 200-foot steel towers to replace insulators, check connections, or clear vegetation. My truck is loaded with climbing gear, voltage testers, replacement hardware, and enough safety equipment to open my own shop. I've got my Class A commercial license for the bucket truck, my high-voltage electrical certification, and 12 years of experience working lines that could kill you if you make one wrong move. The crew knows me as the guy who volunteers for the hardest climbs. While other techs prefer bucket truck work, I actually enjoy free climbing the tall structures. There's something peaceful about being up there, 300 feet above the forest, with nothing but you, the steel, and the mountain wind. Plus, the pay is better for high-risk climbs, and with a mortgage and 2 kids, every dollar counts. Everything started going wrong in early October. We'd been getting calls about mysterious power outage. It was in the Blackwater Canyon area. The outages didn't make sense. They'd last anywhere from 20 minutes to 3 hours, then power would come back on by itself. No storm damage, no equipment failures, no tree branches on the lines. Our control room couldn't find any logical reason for the blackouts. The really weird part was the customer complaints. People said they heard this low humming sound right before the power went out. Not the normal 60 hertz hum you get from transmission lines. This was deeper, almost like singing. Some folks said it sounded like it was coming from inside the towers themselves. My supervisor, Rick Martinez, had been with the company for 25 years and had never seen anything like it. "Jerry," he said, pulling up the outage reports on his computer, "we've got 7 towers in a 15-mile stretch that are causing problems. No pattern to it. Sometimes it's Tower 43, sometimes 47, sometimes the whole circuit goes dark for no reason." The company was losing money every time we had to dispatch crews to investigate. Worse, the Public Service Commission was starting to ask questions about our reliability numbers. Rick was under pressure from the district manager to figure out what was causing the outages. "I need someone to do a full inspection of Tower 47, Rick told me on a Tuesday morning. "It's the tallest structure in the affected area, 300 feet, sits on Hawksbill Ridge. If something's interfering with our lines, that tower would be the most likely target." Tower 47 was a beast. A massive steel lattice structure that carried 369 kVVR circuits across a deep valley. It was so remote that we could only reach it by helicopter or ATV, and even then you had to hike the last mile through thick forest. I'd been up that tower maybe 6 times in my career, always for major repairs or equipment upgrades. "I'll take the ATV up tomorrow morning," I told Rick. "Weather looks good, and I can be there by sunrise." That night, I loaded my truck with everything I'd need for a full tower inspection: climbing gear, voltage detector, binoculars, camera for documenting any damage, and my portable radio. I also packed extra water and my emergency GPS beacon, company policy for any solo work on remote towers. I left the house at 4:30 a.m., driving the back roads toward Blackwater Canyon as the sun started to rise. The autumn colors were incredible. Reds and golds covering the mountainsides like someone had set the forest on fire. It would have been beautiful if I hadn't been so focused on the job ahead. The ATV trail to Tower 47 was rough, 4 miles of switchbacks and rocky terrain that took me 40 minutes to navigate. When I finally reached the tower site, something felt wrong immediately. The forest was too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, nothing. Even the insects seemed to have abandoned the area. Then I saw the scratch marks. Deep gouges in the steel beams near the base of the tower, like someone had taken a giant set of claws and raked them across the metal. The marks were fresh, no rust, still showing bright steel underneath, but they were way too big to be from any animal I knew. Bear claws might scratch metal, but these gouges were 8 feet off the ground and ran in parallel lines that were 2 feet apart. I pulled out my camera and started documenting everything. As I walked around the base of the tower, I found more evidence that something was wrong. Sections of the security fencing had been torn open from the inside, not cut with tools, but ripped apart by something incredibly strong. My voltage detector was acting strange too. It kept beeping randomly, showing readings that didn't match anything I was seeing. According to the device, there should have been dangerous voltage levels in areas where the lines were clearly de-energized. I started my climb around 7 a.m., checking each level of the tower structure as I went up. The first 100 feet looked normal. Insulators, clean, connections tight, no obvious problems. But as I climbed higher, I started finding more of those scratch marks and sections where the electrical cable had been cut clean through. Not damaged by weather or equipment failure, deliberately cut. Someone or something had been systematically sabotaging the power lines from inside the tower structure. The cuts were precise, like they'd been made by someone who knew exactly where to damage the cables to cause outages without triggering our protection systems. At 200 feet, I found the nest. It was built in the cross-bracing between the main structural members, made from stolen copper wire woven together with animal bones and what looked like pieces of clothing. The whole thing was about 6 feet across and reeked of decay and ozone. That sharp smell you get during electrical storms. Inside the nest, I could see partially eaten birds and small animals, but also things that made my blood run cold. Human jewelry, a watch, some rings, a necklace with someone's name engraved on it. I recognized one of the rings from a missing person case I'd seen on the local news. A hiker named David Walsh had disappeared in this area 3 months ago. My radio crackled to life. "Jerry, this is base. How's it looking up there?" I keyed the mic, but before I could answer, I heard something moving above me. Heavy, deliberate movement on the steel beams, like something large was shifting its weight. The whole tower structure vibrated slightly. "Base, I'm at the 200-foot level," I said quietly into the radio. "Found some unusual damage up here. Going to check the upper levels." As I climbed past the nest, the scratching sounds got louder. Metal on metal, like claws scraping across steel beams. My voltage detector was going crazy now, beeping constantly and showing impossible readings. At 250 feet, I looked up through the tower structure and saw it. A creature hanging upside down from the crossbeams about 30 feet above me. It was roughly human-shaped but covered in coarse black fur. Its wings were folded against its back, leathery membranes that looked like they could span 20 feet or more. But the face was the worst part, like someone had crossed a bat with a human, all sharp teeth and glowing red eyes. The thing was staring right at me. I froze on the ladder, not daring to move. Every instinct told me to climb down as fast as possible, but the creature was between me and the ground. My hand slowly moved toward my radio, but before I could call for help, the thing spoke. "You climb in my territory, wireman." Its voice sounded like metal grinding against metal, like the tower itself was talking to me. The creature unfolded its wings slightly and dropped down to my level, hanging upside down from a beam about 10 feet away. I was just inspecting the tower, I managed to say. "I can leave. I won't bother you." The red eyes studied me for a long moment. "You've seen too much, Jerry Simpson. You've seen my hunting grounds." It knew my name. Somehow this impossible creature knew who I was. "You want to know why your power goes out?" It continued. "I feed on the electricity. These towers, these lines, they're my dinner table. When I'm hungry, I drain them dry." The creature gestured toward the transmission lines with one clawed hand. As it did, I saw arcs of electricity jump between the cables, even though the lines should have been carrying normal voltage. "I've been using these mountains as feeding grounds for longer than your kind has been stringing wire between poles," it said. "Every few decades, some human climbs too high and discovers my secret." My radio crackled again. "Jerry, base calling. You've been up there for over an hour. Everything okay?" The creature smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Then it spoke into the air in my exact voice. "Base, this is Jerry. Everything's normal up here. Just taking my time with the inspection. Jerry out." Perfect mimicry. The thing could imitate me so well that my own crew couldn't tell the difference. "That's how I avoid detection," it explained in its grinding metal voice. "When utility workers get too curious, I simply become them long enough to redirect their attention." The creature wrapped its wings around me and lifted me higher up the tower. At 280 feet, I could see the full scope of what I was dealing with. In the distance, I could make out dozens of other transmission towers, and many of them had the same kind of damage I'd found here. "My territory covers 3 states, the creature said proudly. "Hundreds of towers, thousands of miles of wire. Your power companies have been feeding me for decades without knowing it." It dropped me onto a narrow beam, forcing me to balance 280 feet above the ground with nothing but my safety harness to keep me from falling. "Now, Jerry Simpson, I give you the same choice I gave David Walsh and the others. Join me in my electrical feast and live forever, or—" The creature gestured toward the ground far below. I pretended to consider its offer while slowly reaching for the emergency beacon on my safety harness. The device would send a distress signal with my GPS coordinates to our dispatch center. What would I have to do?" I asked, trying to keep the creature talking. "Feed with me," it said. "Drain the power from these lines. Feel the electricity flow through your body instead of just working around it. You already understand the power. I can sense it in you." As it spoke, the creature began pulling energy from the transmission lines around us. Sparks and electrical arcs lit up the tower structure like a Tesla coil display. The hair on my arms stood up from the static electricity in the air. In the chaos of electrical discharge, I managed to activate my emergency beacon without the creature noticing. Now, I just had to stay alive long. Enough for help to arrive. The Mothman, because that's what it had to be, the legendary creature people had been seeing in Appalachia for decades, was completely focused on feeding. It had. Its wings spread wide, and electricity was actually flowing from the lines into its body. I realized this might be my only chance. While the creature was distracted, I grabbed one of the energized ground wires and jammed it against the Mothman's wing. The shock went through both of us like a lightning bolt. The creature screamed, a sound like metal tearing, and lost its grip on the tower beams. It fell about 50 feet before spreading its wings and catching itself, but the electrical shock had clearly hurt it. I didn't wait around to see if it was okay. I clipped into the tower's safety cable and rappelled down as fast as I could, ignoring proper safety procedures in my desperation to reach the ground. Behind me, I could hear the creature recovering, its wings beating against the tower structure as it climbed back up. But I was already at the 100-foot level and dropping fast. When I hit the ground, I could hear helicopter rotors in the distance. My emergency beacon had worked. Rick and the crew were coming to investigate. The Mothman must have heard it too, because when I looked back up the tower, the creature spread its massive wings and disappeared into the forest. Rick's helicopter landed about 10 minutes later. They found me sitting at the base of Tower 47, covered in electrical burns from my contact with the energized wire, shaking uncontrollably. "Jesus, Jerry, what happened up there?" Rick asked as the crew helped me into the helicopter. I tried to tell them about the creature, about the nests and the missing hikers and the electrical feeding, but nobody believed me. The company doctor said I was hallucinating from electrical shock, and the official report blamed the tower damage on vandalism by unknown persons. I quit Mountain State Electric 2 weeks later. Couldn't bring myself to climb another tower, knowing what might be waiting up there in the steep, bell and wire. But I didn't stop thinking about the Mothman. I started researching power outages across West Virginia, Kentucky, and Virginia, mapping them against missing person reports and cryptid sightings. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. The creature migrates between different mountain ranges, always following the transmission corridors. Other power line workers started reaching out to me after I went public with my story online. Techs from 3 different states with similar experiences. Creatures in the towers, mysterious outages, equipment that behaved impossibly. We formed an unofficial network, sharing information and watching for patterns. The Mothman is still out there, feeding on electricity and using our power grid like a highway system. Every time you see an unexplained blackout in rural Appalachia, every time the lights flicker for no reason, remember that some things in these mountains are older and hungrier than anything we understand. And if you ever find yourself climbing a transmission tower in the middle of nowhere, pay attention to how quiet the forest gets. Because if you can't hear any birds singing, you might not be alone up there in the steel and wire. My name is Caleb Morrison, and I've been a professional hunting guide in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina for 21 years. I got my guide license when I was 20, right after my grandfather taught me every trail, cave, and water source in these mountains. I've taken hundreds of clients on hunts for deer, bear, and wild boar. Rich guys from Atlanta, New York businessmen, even a few celebrities who wanted to bag a trophy without anyone knowing. I've never lost a client, never failed to find game, and never had an accident on my watch. My reputation was perfect. But what happened last October, in the deepest part of the Appalachian wilderness, changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains I called home. The week started normal enough. I had 4 businessmen from Atlanta booked for a premium bear hunting expedition. They paid top dollar, $15,000 each for a 5-day guaranteed trophy hunt in areas most guides won't even go. These weren't weekend warriors with fancy gear they didn't know how to use. These guys had been hunting for years, and they wanted the real deal. Remote wilderness, big game, and bragging rights back at their country club. My base camp was set up 12 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by ATV. I had 2 wall tents, a cook station, and enough supplies for a week. The clients had brought their own high-end rifles, custom 300 Winchester Magnums that cost more than my truck. Everything was by the book. I had my hunting licenses, liability insurance, and emergency satellite phone. The weather was perfect. Crisp October mornings with clear skies. The first day went exactly as planned. We tracked a decent black bear through the morning, and one of the clients got a clean shot around noon. A nice 350-pound male that would look good on anyone's wall. The guys were happy, I was earning my fee, and we spent the evening around the campfire sharing hunting stories and drinking whiskey. But the second morning, everything changed. I was checking the area around our camp at dawn, looking for fresh sign when I found the tracks. At first glance, they looked like a big cat, rounded pads with 4 toes. But something was wrong. These prints were massive, nearly 6 inches across, way bigger than any bobcat, and we haven't had mountain lions in North Carolina for over 100 years. The game wardens will tell you they're extinct here. The tracks were fresh, maybe only a few hours old. Deep impressions in the soft earth near a stream. What really got my attention were the claw marks. Most cats have retractable claws that don't show in tracks unless they're running or fighting. These claws were out, long and curved, leaving gouges in the dirt. I followed the trail for about a quarter mile. It led to a game trail where I found something that made my stomach turn. 3 deer carcasses, all within 50 yards of each other. But they weren't killed like any predator I knew. The bodies were intact. No torn flesh, no scattered remains like you'd see from bears or coyotes. Instead, each deer had 2 deep puncture wounds in the neck, and they were completely drained of blood, not a drop on the ground around them. I've seen thousands of predator kills in my 21 years guiding. Bears will tear their prey apart. Coyotes eat what they can and leave scraps. Even big cats will feed on their kills. But this was different. It was like something had used these deer as juice boxes. I radioed back to camp and told the clients I needed a few hours to scout new areas. I didn't want to spook them with talk about mystery predators. They were paying for a normal hunting experience, not a cryptid investigation. But I couldn't stop thinking about those tracks. My grandfather used to tell stories about something he called the vampire cat. Said it terrorized communities throughout Appalachia in the old days. In the 1950s, there were reports of something called the Beast of Blattenborough that killed livestock in a similar way, puncture wounds, bodies drained of blood. The attacks stopped suddenly after some military personnel showed up to investigate. Grandpa always said they caught something, but it wasn't the only one of its kind. I'd always figured those were just mountain legends, stories passed down to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. But looking at those drained deer carcasses, I wasn't so sure anymore. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow the tracks while my clients took their afternoon rest. I told them I was checking new hunting areas for the next day. I grabbed my rifle, GPS, and enough gear for a few hours in the field. The trail led deeper into wilderness than I'd been in years, past the normal hunting grounds, beyond the marked trails, into country that's been wild since before Europeans set foot in America. The tracks stayed clear in the soft soil, following ridge lines and avoiding open areas. Whatever made them was smart enough to use natural cover. After 2 hours of tracking, I found myself at a limestone cliff face I'd never seen before. The GPS showed I was nearly 15 miles from base camp in a valley that didn't exist on any of my topographic maps. The tracks led directly to a cave opening in the rock wall. The mouth of the cave was about 8 feet wide and tall enough for a person to walk through. But it was the bones scattered around the entrance that made me stop cold. Dozens of skeletons from all kinds of animals, deer, bears, smaller predators, even what looked like coyote remains. Every single bone was picked completely clean and white as chalk. I turned on my flashlight and peered into the cave. The beam only penetrated about 20 feet before the passage curved out of sight. But in that light, I saw something that made every hair on my body stand up. 2 eyes reflecting back at me from the dark. Ness. Not the green shine of a deer or the yellow glow of a bear. These were different. Red, like looking into dying coals. The eyes disappeared the moment my light hit them, but I heard movement deeper in the cave. Something big, shifting position in the darkness. I should have left right then. Any smart guide would have backed away and gotten the hell out of there. But 21 years of experience made me curious instead of careful. I'd dealt with black bears, wild boars, and aggressive clients. I figured I could handle whatever was hiding in that cave. I was wrong. I took 3 steps into the cave when something moved behind me. I spun around just as a creature emerged from a side passage I hadn't seen. In the beam of my flashlight, I got my first clear look at the thing my grandfather had warned me about. It was jet black and massive, over 6 feet long from nose to tail, with a body built like a panther but wrong in every way that mattered. Its head was too large, its legs too long, and its teeth, Christ, its teeth were like something from a saber-toothed cat. Fangs nearly 4 inches long, curved and sharp as razors. But it was the intelligence in those red eyes that scared me most. This wasn't a dumb animal acting on instinct. This thing was studying me, evaluating me like a chess player considering his next move. "You taste different from the others, guide man," it said. It spoke. In a voice like gravel grinding against metal, this impossible creature spoke English. My training kicked in, and I slowly reached for my rifle. But the thing was faster than physics should allow. It moved like liquid shadow, circling around me before I could even get the gun off my shoulder. 21 years you've brought them here," it continued, never stopping its circular stalking. "Rich men, hunters. They think they're predators, but they're just meat that walks upright." It knew about me. This thing had been watching my hunts, studying my clients. "You're different. You understand these mountains. You know the old stories." The creature paused directly in front of me, red eyes fixed on mine. "Your grandfather told you about me." I managed to get my rifle in position, but my hands were shaking. "What are you?" "I am the last of my kind. I have lived in these mountains for longer than your people have walked upright. I survive by drinking the blood of apex predators and human hunters." It showed those massive fangs in what might have been a smile. "Human hunters are my favorite prey. They provide the most challenging hunt." The cave suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. I realized I was standing in a natural tomb filled with the bones of this thing's victims. Some of those skeletons looked human. "You've been feeding on my clients," I said, the pieces falling into place. "Only the ones who wander away from camp, the ones who think they can track me alone." It took a step closer. "Like you." I pulled the trigger. My .30-06 roared in the confined space, but the creature moved before the bullet reached it. The shot hit the cave wall and ricocheted, sending stone fragments flying. One piece grazed the beast's shoulder, and dark blood began to drip. The thing screamed. It was the worst sound I've ever heard, like a woman in agony mixed with a panther's roar. The wounded creature became enraged, launching itself at me with claws extended. I rolled to the side, feeling razor-sharp claws tear through my jacket. The beast landed silently and immediately prepared for another attack. I scrambled deeper into the cave, using my flashlight to navigate narrow passages while trying to reload my rifle. Behind me, I could hear the creature following. It moved through complete darkness better than I could with light, its claws clicking on stone as it closed the distance. The passage opened into a larger chamber, and my flashlight beam revealed the full horror of this thing's hunting ground. Human bones mixed with anima. Bull remains covered the floor. Backpacks, hunting gear, and personal items from victims going back decades. I recognized some of the equipment, clients I'd guided who went missing during solo scouting trips. The creature appeared at the chamber entrance, blocking my escape route. "You cannot run from me, guide man. I have hunted in darkness since before your ancestors discovered fire." I was trapped, but 21 years in these mountains had taught me more than just hunting. I noticed something the creature hadn't: old mining equipment left over from when people tried to work these hills for coal. Specifically, dynamite and blasting caps from miners who'd given up on the hard limestone. I pulled out a road flare from my emergency kit and lit it. The red light filled the chamber, and I saw the creature flinch from the sudden brightness. "You want to hunt?" I said, grabbing a stick of dynamite. "Let's hunt." I used the flare to light the fuse and threw the explosive deeper into the cave system. The creature realized what I was doing and lunged at me, but the dynamite detonated before it could reach me. The explosion was deafening. Rock fell from the ceiling as the cave system partially collapsed. I threw myself into a narrow crevice as tons of limestone crashed down where I'd been standing. When the dust cleared, I could hear the creature screaming from somewhere in the collapsed tunnels. Hurt, but not dead. I squeezed through the crevice and found myself outside the cave. The entrance was now blocked by fallen rock, but I could still hear movement from inside. I stumbled back to base camp, injured and traumatized. My jacket was torn, I had cuts from flying rock, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I told my clients I'd fallen while tracking deer sign. They bought the story, but I could see the concern in their eyes. I ended the hunt early. Told them we'd gotten a nut. H-game and the weather was turning bad. They weren't happy about cutting their expensive trip short, but they respected my judgment as their guide. I never guided hunts in that area again. I warn other guides away from those mountains, though I can't tell them the real reason why. They'd think I'd lost my mind. Sometimes hikers still report finding animal carcasses drained of blood near where that cave used to be. The state wildlife people blame it on feral dogs or possibly a surviving population of mountain lions. But I know better. That thing is still in there, still hunting. The cave-in didn't kill it, just trapped it temporarily. And someday, it's going to dig its way out. When it does, I hope I'm too old to remember the promise I saw in those red eyes. The promise that someday, it's coming to finish our hunt. My name is Tommy Briggs, and I've been driving long-haul trucks for 8 years. I got my CDL when I was 28, right after my dad lost his job at the steel mill. The pay's decent, and I like being on the road. Most drivers hate the overnight runs, but not me. The highways are empty, the radio plays better music, and there's something peaceful about watching the world sleep while you're moving cargo from one place to another. My regular route takes me through the most remote parts of Arkansas and Tennessee, delivering supplies to logging camps and construction sites tucked away in the mountains. These places are so far off the beaten path that GPS stops working about 50 miles before you reach them. But after 8 years of making this run twice a week, I know every curve, every hill, and every truck stop by heart. I drive a 2018 Peterbilt 579 with a 53-foot dry van trailer. She's got 720,000 miles on her, but the engine still purrs like the day she rolled off the lot. I keep her clean, check the tires before every trip, and never skip an oil change. In this business, your truck is your lifeline. Break down in the middle of nowhere, and you're stuck until help comes, if it comes at all. The company I work for, Mountain Supply Express, has been running freight to these remote camps for over 20 years. We haul everything from food and fuel to construction materials and heavy equipment. The money's good because nobody else wants to make these runs. The roads are narrow, winding, and dangerous, especially at night. But I prefer the darkness. Less traffic means I can make better time, and there's something about driving through the mountains under a canopy of stars that never gets old. Tonight's load was special. Construction materials bound for a logging operation deep in the Ouachita Mountains. Concrete mix, rebar, metal roofing, and some specialized equipment I didn't even pronounce. The manifest said the camp was expanding, building new barracks for a crew of 40 men who'd be working there through the winter. My job was simple: deliver the load, get the paperwork signed, and head home before sunrise. I'd made this exact run probably 100 times before. The route takes you through 3 small towns, past a dozen truck stops that close at midnight, and finally onto a 2-lane mountain highway that winds through the national forest. The last gas station is about 80 miles from the camp, and after that, it's just you, the trees, and whatever wildlife calls these mountains home. The weather was perfect that night. Clear skies, no wind, and temperatures in the mid-60s. I'd loaded up at the warehouse around 6 p.m., grabbed a coffee and a sandwich at the Flying J, and hit the road just as the sun was setting. Everything was normal. Everything was routine. I had no idea I was about to encounter something that would change how I see the world forever. I left the last truck stop around 11:30 p.m., topped off with diesel and armed with 2 energy drinks and a bag of beef jerky. The GPS had already given up, showing nothing but green forest for miles in every direction, but I didn't need it. I knew this road like the lines on my palm. The highway stretched ahead of me, 2 lanes of cracked asphalt cutting through dense forest on both sides. The headlights of my Peterbilt carved through the darkness, illuminating reflective mile markers and the occasional deer crossing sign. My CB radio crackled with distant conversations between drivers on other routes, but out here, I was alone. I'd been driving for about an hour when the first strange thing happened. The smell hit me like a punch to the gut, something awful, like a dead animal that had been rotting in the summer heat for weeks. But mixed with that death smell was something else too. Something wild and musky, like wet dog fur. I rolled down my window thinking maybe something had died on the road ahead and the smell would pass, but it only got stronger. I'd driven past roadkill plenty of times, deer, possums, even a black bear once, but this was different. This smell made my eyes water and my stomach turn. The odor seemed to be coming from the forest itself, seeping through the trees and settling over the highway like a thick fog. I tried breathing through my mouth, but I could taste it on my tongue, sweet and sour and wrong in every possible way. My radio started acting up around the same time. The conversations from other drivers faded to static, then went completely silent. I fiddled with the antenna, thinking maybe I'd driven into a dead zone, but nothing helped. Even the local AM stations weren't coming in. That's when I saw something cross the road ahead. At first I thought it was a bear, something large and dark moving from the tree line on the right to the forest on the left. But as my headlights swept across it, I realized it was walking upright, not lumbering like a bear, but striding on two legs like a person. Except it was huge, bigger than any person I'd ever seen. I hit the brakes and came to a stop right where I'd seen it cross. My heart was pounding and I could hear the diesel engine idling in the sudden quiet. I grabbed my flashlight from the door pocket and climbed down from the cab. The smell was overwhelming now, so strong it made me gag. I covered my nose with my shirt and walked to where I'd seen the thing cross. That's when I found the footprints. They were pressed deep into the muddy shoulder of the road, each one over a foot long and shaped like a human foot, but wrong. Too wide, with toes that ended in what looked like claw marks. The stride between them was enormous, nearly 6 feet from print to print. I followed the tracks with my flashlight beam, watching them disappear into the tree line. Branches were broken at 8 or 9 feet off the ground, snapped clean like something massive had pushed through them. Leaves and bark were scattered on the forest floor, and I could see a clear path where whatever made these prints had crashed through the undergrowth. Growing up in Arkansas, you hear stories about the Fook monster. Some people call it Bigfoot, others say it's just a legend made up to scare kids. I'd always figured it was bull, just stories told around campfires to give people the creeps. But standing there in the middle of nowhere, staring at footprints that couldn't belong to any animal I knew, I wasn't so sure anymore. I heard breathing in the darkness beyond my flashlight beam, deep, steady breaths that sounded almost human but wrong somehow. Too loud, too slow. The sound made the hair on my arms stand up. Then something hit my truck. The sound was like a sledgehammer against metal, loud enough to echo through the forest. I spun around and saw a dent in the side of my trailer, right about head high for something 8 feet tall. A rock the size of a softball lay on the ground beneath it. I ran back to my cab and locked the doors, my hands shaking as I turned the key. Nothing. The engine that had been purring like a kitten just minutes before was completely dead. I tried again, pumping the gas pedal, but got nothing but the sound of the starter clicking uselessly. That's when I saw it in my passenger side mirror. The creature was standing at the edge of my headlight beam, just barely visible in the darkness. It was massive, over 7 feet tall, covered in coarse, reddish-brown hair that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Its arms hung down past its knees, ending in hands that looked almost human except for the size. Its face was the worst part. It looked like someone had tried to mix an ape and a person and gotten it horribly wrong. Yellow eyes that caught the light like a cat's, a mouth full of teeth that were too big and too sharp, and an expression of intelligence that was somehow more frightening than animal rage would have been. The Fook monster, because that's what it was, no matter how crazy it sounded, circled my truck slowly, examining it like a mechanic checking for problems. When it placed its hands on the side of my trailer, the whole rig rocked back and forth. I could see its handprints on the metal afterward, muddy impressions of fingers that were too long and palms that were too wide. I tried my CB radio, desperate to call for help, but all I got was static mixed with sounds that didn't make sense. Howls and grunts that might have been voices trying to form words. The creature seemed to hear the radio and tilted its head toward my cab like a dog listening to a whistle only it could hear. Then it climbed onto my trailer. I felt the suspension compress under its weight as it walked across the top of my load. The cargo straps I'd tightened that afternoon started snapping one by one, and I heard my freight shifting and crashing to the ground. Construction materials that weighed hundreds of pounds were being tossed around like toys. But the monster wasn't just destroying my load randomly. It was looking for something specific. I watched in my mirrors as it sorted through the concrete mix and rebar, tossing aside the lighter materials and collecting the metal pieces. It handled the steel beams like they were made of cardboard, bending them into shapes that made no sense. The creature was using tools, not just picking things up and throwing them, but actually using the metal pipes as levers and the rebar as digging implements. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just an animal. It was intelligent, maybe more intelligent than I wanted to admit. I started honking my horn, long blasts that echoed through the forest. Maybe someone would hear. Maybe it would scare the creature away. Maybe I'd wake up and discover this was all just a nightmare brought on by too much coffee and not enough sleep. Instead, the monster responded by slamming its fists against my windshield. Spimo. Eider web cracks spread across the glass with each impact, and I was sure it was going to cave in completely. The sound was deafening inside the cab, like being inside a bass drum while someone beat it with hammers. That's when I saw the others. My horn had attracted attention, but not the kind I'd hoped for. Eyes were reflecting in the forest around me, dozens of pairs, glowing like amber marbles in my headlights. They were watching from the trees, from behind rocks, from the shadows at the edge of the road. More creatures emerged from the darkness, smaller ones that might have been juveniles, walking alongside what I assumed were adults. They moved like a family, communicating with grunts and hand gestures that looked almost like sign language. The big one that had been dismantling my truck was clearly the leader. The others deferred to it, waiting for its signals before approaching. I realized I hadn't stumbled into a random encounter. I'd driven into their territory during some kind of gathering. Maybe they were a family group. Maybe it was mating season. Or maybe they'd chosen this stretch of highway as a hunting ground, waiting for trucks like mine to come through carrying the materials they needed. Because that's what they were doing, harvesting construction supplies. The creatures worked with disturbing efficiency, sorting through my freight and taking only the metal and tools. They ignored the concrete mix and the roofing materials, but every piece of steel, every tool, every bit of hardware disappeared into the forest. They'd been doing this for years, maybe decades. How many drivers had been through here and reported accidents or equipment failures? How many loads had been mysteriously damaged or lost? I thought about all the stories I'd heard about trucks breaking down on this route, about drivers who'd quit after one too many strange encounters they couldn't explain. The monsters were building something deep in the forest, using stolen materials to construct whatever it was they needed, and they were smart enough to only take what they required, leaving enough undamaged freight to make it look like accident or incompetence rather than theft. Suddenly, my truck roared to life. The battery that had been dead minutes before now showed full power, and the engine turned over on the first try. I didn't waste time wondering why. I threw the transmission into drive and floored the accelerator. The creatures blocking the road scattered as I crashed through their group, but they didn't run in panic like animals would. They moved with purpose, regrouping behind me as I pulled away. In my mirrors, I could see them chasing my truck on foot, their long strides keeping pace with my speedometer as it climbed past 40, then 50, then 60 miles per hour. They followed me for what felt like hours but was probably only a few miles, their eyes glowing in my taillights like traffic cones. Only when I crossed what must have been the edge of their territory did they finally give up, fading back into the forest like they'd never been there at all. I reached the logging camp just as the sun was coming up, my hands still shaking and my shirt soaked with sweat. The crew foreman took one look at my truck, covered in muddy handprints and missing half my cargo, and asked what the hell had happened. I tried to tell him. I tried to explain about the creature, the footprints, the intelligence behind those yellow eyes. He listened politely, then suggested I get some coffee and rest before making the drive home. Fatigue-induced hallucinations, he called it. Happens to long-haul drivers all the time. But the other drivers at the camp weren't so quick to dismiss my story. Over breakfast, they shared their own experiences, tools that went missing overnight, equipment that was moved or damaged by something that wasn't human, sounds in the forest that didn't match any known animal. They'd learned not to work alone after dark, and they'd learned not to investigate strange noises. I filed my incident report with the company, describing the encounter as equipment failure and possible vandalism. The insurance covered the lost cargo, and my supervisor chalked it up to one of those things that happens when you're driving through remote areas. But I started carrying a camera on my runs after that. Motion activated, infrared, mounted where it couldn't be seen from outside the cab. And I've documented more encounters than I care to count. Shadows moving between the trees, eyes reflecting in my mirrors, handprints on my truck that appear overnight when I'm sleeping in truck stops. The Fook monsters are real, and they're not the primitive animals the legends make them out to be. They're intelligent, organized, and they've been using our highways as their personal supply chain for longer than any of us want to admit. They take what they need and leave just enough evidence to maintain the myth while keeping the truth hidden. I still drive that route twice a week. The pay's too good to give up, and besides, now I know what to expect. I keep my windows up, my doors locked, and my camera rolling. And sometimes, late at night when the forest is quiet and the road stretches empty ahead of me, I wonder what they're building out there in the darkness. Whatever it is, I hope I never have to see it. My name is Rick Santos, and I've been a cell tower technician for 12 years. I climb those tall metal towers you see on mountains and in fields, the ones that give you cell phone service. Most people think it's crazy dangerous work, and they're right. I've climbed towers up to 500 feet tall, sometimes in storms or heavy winds. I've seen other climbers fall, get electrocuted, or just quit because they couldn't handle the height anymore. I specialized in the jobs other guys wouldn't take. The towers on mountaintops that you can only reach by helicopter, the old ones with rusty bolts and broken safety cables, the emergency repairs during bad weather. My boss always called me when they had a tower that scared everyone else. What happened last month in Jefferson National Forest changed everything I thought I knew about my job. I've climbed hundreds of towers, fixed thousands of problems, but I'd never seen anything like Tower VB-127, and I hope I never see anything like it again. The call came on a Tuesday morning. My supervisor, Dave, sounded stressed on the phone. "Rick, we've got a weird one. Tower VB-127 up in Jefferson National Forest. Signal's been messed up for weeks, and the local people are complaining about their phones." I grabbed my clipboard and started writing down the details. Tower VB-127 was a 350-foot tower sitting on an isolated mountain peak. The only way to get there was by helicopter because the roads didn't go that far up. It was built 15 years ago and usually worked fine. "What kind of complaints?" I asked. "Strange voices on their calls. Weird sounds, like animals or something. Calls getting dropped or connecting to wrong numbers. The whole system's acting crazy up there." I'd heard similar problems before. Usually it was just old equipment breaking down or water getting into the electronics. Sometimes animals would build nests in the EQBs. Anything like it on a tower before. I strapped on my climbing harness and started my safety checks. My voltage meter was acting up, showing random readings even when I wasn't testing anything. My radio kept picking up static and what sounded like distant voices, but I couldn't make out any words. Probably just interference from the broken equipment up top, I told myself. But something felt wrong from the moment I clipped my first carabiner to the tower. I started climbing at 9 a.m. The first 100 feet went normally, just standard tower climbing on a clear morning. But around 150 feet, I started noticing more of that dried substance on the beams. It was thicker here, coating entire sections of metal. Some of it looked fresh and wet. My equipment kept malfunctioning. My safety monitor, which tracks my heart rate and position, showed error messages I'd never seen before. My radio filled with strange sounds, clicks, squeaks, and what sounded like multiple people talking at once, but too quiet to understand. At 200 feet, I found something that made me stop climbing completely. Wedged between the tower beams were objects that didn't belong there. Cell phones, dozens of them, all different models and ages. Pieces of jewelry, rings, necklaces, watches. Shiny metal pieces that looked like they came from cars or airplanes. I recognized some of the airplane pieces. 3 years ago, a small plane crashed somewhere in these mountains. The pilot's body was never found, and the wreckage was never recovered. But here were pieces of aluminum and steel that could only have come from an aircraft. Mixed in with all the collected objects, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Human bones. A skull, rib bones, what looked like an entire arm still wearing a pilot's uniform sleeve. Someone or something had been collecting these items and bringing them to the tower. I grabbed my dial to call for backup, but all I got was static mixed with sounds I couldn't identify. Clicking noises, high-pitched screeches, and underneath it all, human voices repeating the same phrases over and over. I knew I should climb down and leave immediately. But I'd never left a job unfinished, and I was still trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe some crazy person was living up here, collecting junk. Maybe the bones were old and had nothing to do with the missing pilot. I kept climbing. At 250 feet, the tower's structure changed completely. The normal steel framework was interwoven with what looked like a giant nest. Thick branches, strips of metal, pieces of fabric, and more of that dried substance formed a complex structure that extended the tower's width by at least 20 feet in every direction. And that's when I saw it. Clinging to the very top of the tower, about 30 feet above me, was something that shouldn't exist. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, with a wingspan that had to be 20 feet across. It had leathery wings like a bat, but the body structure of something almost human. Its head was reptilian but intelligent, with large eyes that watched me climb toward it. The creature, and I had no other word for it, didn't seem surprised to see me. It tilted its head and made a sound that my radio picked up and amplified. It sounded like a cell phone ringing. My climbing equipment started sparking. My safety harness gave off small electrical shocks, and my rope began smoking where it touched the metal beams. The creature was generating some kind of electromagnetic field that was overloading all my electronic gear. I tried to climb down, but the creature spread its wings and dropped from the tower top. It circled around me, creating downdrafts that threatened to blow me off the tower. Its wings beat with incredible power, and I could see intelligence in its eyes. This wasn't just some animal. At 180 feet, my rope got tangled in the modified framework. I was stuck, hanging from my harness while this impossible creature circled overhead. It landed on a platform about 10 feet above me, folding its wings and studying me like a scientist examining a bug. That's when it spoke. Rick Santos, Tower Technician, Employee ID 47291. The voice came from the creature, but it sounded like multiple people talking at the same time. Assigned to repair Tower VB-127. Expected return time 6 p.m. It knew my name. It knew my job details. It was speaking in the exact words from my work order, which was stored on my supervisor's computer back at the office. Cellular call intercepted, it continued, now using what sounded like my supervisor's voice. Dave to Rick, Tuesday, 8:47 a.m. Strange voices on their calls, weird sounds, like animals or something. The creature had been listening to phone calls, not just random calls. It was intercepting cellular signals and learning from every conversation that passed through the tower. It had been doing this for years, absorbing human language and information from thousands of phone calls. I've been expanding, it said, now using multiple voices at once. Men, women, children, all talking in perfect unison. Modifying towers, improving the network. Soon, every tower will be mine. I managed to pull out my knife and started cutting at the tangled rope. The creature watched with interest but didn't try to stop me. You understand technology, it continued. You can help me reach the other towers faster. In return, I will let you join my collection instead of eating you immediately. It gestured with one wing toward the bones woven into the nest structure. I realized this thing wasn't just collecting shiny objects. It was collecting people. The missing pilot, and probably others who had come too close to its territory. I've learned so much from the voices, it said, now using the voice of a young girl. GPS coordinates, traffic patterns, daily schedule, Less. I can lure people anywhere I want, just by making their phones give wrong directions. My rope finally cut through, and I started rappelling down the tower as fast as I could. The creature took off from its platform and followed me down, landing on different levels as I descended. "Police dispatched to Unit 47, it said in a perfect imitation of a radio operator. "Missing hikers last seen on Route 12. Search area expanded to include mountain roads." It was telling me how it hunted. It would cause car accidents by disrupting GPS signals, then collect the victims and their belongings. It had been doing this for years, and no one had connected the missing people to problems with cell towers. At 100 feet, I deployed my emergency chute and let go of the rope entirely. The creature tried to follow, but it was too big to maneuver between the thick trees. I landed hard in the forest and immediately started running toward the helicopter landing zone. Jim was waiting with the engine already running. "Get in," he shouted. "Something's been circling overhead for the last hour." I threw my gear in the helicopter and we took off immediately. Looking back at the tower, I could see the creature perched on top, watching us leave. It made no attempt to follow. The flight back was mostly silent. My equipment was fried, my rope was cut, and I had no proof of what I'd seen except my own story. I knew no one would believe me. I was right. When I filed my report, Dave listened politely and then asked if I'd been drinking or if I was having personal problems. The company sent another technician to the tower a week later. He reported that the equipment was working fine and found no sign of any problems. But I started paying attention to missing person reports in areas with remote cell towers. I found patterns: hikers disappearing near mountain towers, car accidents where GPS systems led PEs, Opal into dead zones, small aircraft going down in areas with communication problems. I quit tower climbing 3 months ago. Now I work for the phone company's office support team, monitoring signal reports and maintenance requests. Whenever I see complaints about strange voices or weird sounds from towers in remote areas, I flag them for investigation. Other climbers have started contacting me privately. Stories about modified towers, electromagnetic interference, and things living in the framework that shouldn't exist. We've identified at least 12 towers across Virginia, West Virginia, and North Carolina where the signals behave strangely. Whatever I saw up there isn't alone. They're spreading, using our own communication network against us, learning from every call and text that passes through their territory. And every day, more people disappear in areas where cell towers report unusual interference. I know I should report this to the authorities, but who would believe it? Instead, I keep monitoring, keep tracking the patterns, and I try to warn people away from the towers that show the wrong kind of problems. Because I've learned that sometimes when your cell phone picks up strange voices or connects to the wrong number, it's not a technical malfunction. Sometimes something is listening, and sometimes it's hungry.